Dr. Basavaraj to start the proceeding. Dr. Basavaraj.
Thank you, sir. Good evening and welcome everyone to Kolhapur Surgical Society's master video series, which we conduct every Saturday at 8 o'clock. So today we are learning the AWR, and I welcome ASI President Dr. Dalvi sir. Dr. Ganeriwal sir would be joining very soon. Today's speakers are Dr. Mahadar sir, Dr. Jignesh Gandhi sir, and Dr. Shivram sir. Our President Dr. Kasa sir, our mentor Dr. Varute sir, today's MMC observer Dr. Vasant Deshmukh sir, and welcome today's moderators Dr. Suresh Deshpande sir, Dr. Mansingh Adnaik, and Dr. Saurabh Gandhi. Welcome delegates, and to begin with, the first speaker, Dr. Rahul Mahadar sir, would be presenting the topic of relearn the anatomy in AWR way. Dr. Rahul Mahadar is a consultant GI surgeon and bariatrics surgeon and AWR surgeon. He is founder member of Abdominal Wall Reconstruction Surgeon Trust of India. He is the first who did laparoscopic TAR in Maharashtra, Gujarat, Goa, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh. He is also one of the founder members of AWR-SC along with Dr. Ramanna, Dr. Pramod Shinde, and Dr. Punjani. Sir has conducted various webinars, delivered many lectures on abdominal wall reconstruction nationally and internationally. So over to you, sir, for your lecture.
Yeah. Thank you for your kind invitation and introduction. I'll just share my screen first. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yeah. So what is a modern hernia surgery or AWR about? It is to restore the function and the structure of the abdominal wall. Then it provides the stable and durable wound coverage and reduce the problems with IPOM or the onlay hernia repair. So the principles for modern hernia repair are: paradigm shift is towards the defect closure, using the uncoated mesh and placing it outside the abdominal cavity, and minimizing the mesh fixation without compromising the hernia repair. Also, MIS approach whenever it is possible, and the customized approach according to the patient's condition. And that is the most important thing about the AWR concept. Now, what are the options for treating hernias nowadays? First is the open repair that everybody knows and everybody are doing. Then the laparoscopic surgeons are doing IPOM plus, the TAP repair. Newer procedures is like the EMELOS or ETAP procedure, that is the extended view extraperitoneal repair. TAM procedure, transabdominal retrorectus retromuscular repair, the SCOLA repair, and the robotic one. The main focus of all these repairs is the repair of the complex large hernias using special techniques to close the midlines alba and augment the repair with the mesh. Is the sublime mesh is most recommended? Yes. This network meta-analysis suggests that the probability of the sublime being the best location for the mesh placement is very high, and this analysis also demonstrates that the high probability of sublime repair is associated with fewest SSIs, and hernia recurrences also are very less. So Reeves Topa, who has started this particular retrorectus or retromuscular repair way back in 1970, and what they did is they just did retrorectus. These are the rectus muscles, and retrorectus dissection has been done, and then after doing the dissection, they have put this mesh into this particular plane, and this is what is called as a retrorectus repair. And the mesh is, you can extend the mesh from the GP sternum to symphysis pubis in the midline, and laterally it extends up to the lateral border of the rectus muscle. So this is a Reeves Topa repair as such. So I am here, Dr. Rahul Mahadar, in front of you for delivering a lecture about applied anatomy of abdominal wall. Let us relearn in AWR way. So rationale for the defect closure is the re-establishment of the viable tissue in the midline by closing the defect, then provide the lattice upon which the mesh can be placed, and reduce the subcutaneous dead space, and also promote the wide patches for the mesh. That means the mesh size will be very wide. Now the midline reconstruction is mandatory, and the defect size less than 6 to 8 centimeters. Simple closure you may achieve even with the open repair as well as the laparoscopic repair, even a robotic repair as well. But the defect is more than 8 centimeters, then how to do it? Then there is a role comes is of a component separation. So what is a component separation then? So component separation is release of group of muscles of abdominal wall from its rigid abdominal arrangements so that the group is free to move towards the midline and you can achieve the midline closure. So here you can see the rectus muscles, and these are the rectus muscles and the composite separation, and then the then you can see here, if you separate the muscles laterally, then the midline is shift can occur in the midline. So this is what is called as a component separation, and that is what is called as a AWR. So midline reconstruction, many ways to do it. So what are the ways? The first is the anterior component separation. The second one is a posterior component separation. Then the periumbilical perforation sparing component separation. Then comes the endoscopic component separation, and then comes the robotic component separation. So what is the anatomy which is required for this particular achieving the midline reconstruction as well as the AWR repair? So anatomy is divided into 3 parts. First is a layers and muscle planes, then the lines, and then comes is a spaces. So these are the only 3 structures that we need to understand again and relearn again so that we can achieve this midline reconstruction. So first we'll see the layers and muscle planes. So most importantly here, if you see the rectus abdominis muscles is midline, and on both the sides of the rectus muscle there is the anterior rectus sheath and a posterior rectus sheath. This anterior rectus sheath is constructed of because of the anterior and posterior lamella of external oblique as well as the anterior lamella of internal oblique, and the posterior rectus sheath is formed by the 2 lamella of transverse abdominis muscle and 1 lamella of internal oblique muscle, and then these 2 anterior rectus sheath and posterior rectus sheath is formed, and in between that is the rectus muscle. So if you see at the level of the 9 costal cartilage, if you see in the midline, you will see only anterior rectus sheath. And if you see down here, then you can see here for the second part, just above the umbilicus, if you see there, you can see 3 muscles with their aponeurotic part, and then the anterior lamella and posterior lamella, they join together to form the anterior rectus sheath and a posterior rectus sheath like this. And if you go below the umbilicus, below the arcuate, or at the level of arcuate line or below it, you can see here all the 3 structures, they are aponeurosis, they go in the anterior to form the anterior rectus sheath, and the muscle is behind, and below that only is the peritoneum. So this is the structural differentiation that is there in the anterior abdominal wall. One has to understand this. So above the arcuate line, if you see here, the rectus muscle above is the anterior rectus sheath, posteriorly is the posterior rectus sheath, and on the lateral side there is the external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle, and transverse abdominal muscle. The most important point here one should remember is the neurovascular bundles, they are always in between the internal oblique and transverse abdominis muscle, and they pierce the posterior lamella of internal oblique, and then they pierce the rectus abdominis muscle. And here this particular abdominal wall is divided into 3 compartments. First compartment is the midline, which is formed by linea alba. Here there is a aponeurotic structure which forms the linea alba as such. Then comes to the transversalis fascia, and below that is the peritoneum. The second compartment is a rectus abdominis muscle, above which is a anterior rectus sheath, posteriorly is the posterior rectus sheath, below that is again transversalis fascia and the peritoneum. So this is the second compartment. And the third compartment is a laterally, that is consisting of these 3 muscles with neurovascular bundle. So one has to understand this. And in AWR repair, what one need to do is you have to join these 3 compartments. So how to join this? So first, even below the arcuate line, first we will see there is only peritoneum, and this peritoneum and the transversalis fascia that need to be dissected. And laterally, one has to understand just at the level of a lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle is the semilunar line, and this is the Lakshman Rekha of AWR repair. So why this is Lakshman Rekha? Because here you have to change the direction of your dissection also. You have to conserve the neurovascular bundle. You should not injure that so that the other complications will not occur. So what we do, how we join these three compartments. First is the dissection of the posterior rectus sheath, and this posterior rectus sheath is then joined after cutting this posterior rectus sheath, then join is this particular part, and this is first two compartments are joined, and this is what is called as a retrorectus repair or Rives-Stoppa repair. And then if you want to go for the lateral dissection or the defect size is more, then in that case, what you need to do is you have to cut the posterior lamella of internal oblique at this level below the neurovascular bundles, and then you have to go into the plane below the transverse abdominis muscles and above the transversalis fascia and peritoneum. And this is what is called as a TAR operation, that is a transverse abdominis release. And then you can combine these three particular compartments. Now one has to understand the most important thing is the arcuate line or the lateral border of the rectus muscle is starting from the ninth rib towards the symphysis pubis, towards the symphysis rami, and this particular line is most important line. And why this is important is you have to see in terms of a transverse abdominis muscles as well. So here you can see the muscles, those are lying laterally in the lower abdomen, and as you go towards the ZP sternum, the muscle comes towards the midline. So bulk of the muscle is in the upper abdomen, and in the lower abdomen there is only aponeurosis. This needs to understand, because below the umbilicus, just above the umbilicus 2 centimeters from there, the aponeurosis starts till the symphysis pubis or pubic bone. So there you will get only aponeurosis of transverse abdominis muscle. And as you go above, then or you are doing the below up or bottoms up TAR, then in those cases, first you deal with the aponeurosis and then with the fleshy muscle fibers. So this one should understand. Then comes the lines. So width of the rectus is ranging from 4.5 centimeters to 12.5 centimeters with an average of 6 to 8 centimeters. And you need to understand the lateral border of rectus, that is a semilunar line, and how it is identified. If you have an ultrasound in your hospital or in your OR, then you can identify it with the help of ultrasound, or otherwise what you should know is this particular algorithm of surface anatomy. This is a midline, and then 7 centimeter from the midline, if you draw a line on either side, this will represent the semilunar line. And the 4 centimeter below the umbilicus, if you draw a horizontal line, that will represent the arcuate line. But the arcuate line, one has to understand that it is always a curvilinear like this. But this is the actual figure or surface anatomy of an anterior abdominal wall. One has to understand. Then comes with the spaces. Now, there are 3 spaces. One is the preperitoneal space. That preperitoneal space is way above at the ZP sternum and at the hypogastric region or epigastric region, as well as hypogastric region. And then comes with the retrorectus space, and third space is a pretransversalis space. Now, what is the importance of these particular spaces? Now, here you can see the preperitoneal space is in the hypogastrium as well as in epigastrium, then the retrorectus space, and then the pretransversalis or below the transversalis muscle. So these are the 3 spaces. We need to join this to form a platform on which your mesh is going to put. You are going to put a mesh, and that will form a lattice or a platform or a plateau wherein you can put a mesh. So what is the importance of these spaces? So preperitoneal space is used for midline crossover, especially in case of a laparoscopic surgery. So epigastric region is a midline crossover is done in the epigastric region as well as in the hypogastric region, from left to right side or right to left side, according to patients or surgeons' preference. So after joining the two spaces, retrorectus spaces, you can get this particular space. This is what is called as the retrorectus space. And this, after dissecting this space, you can put a mesh into this particular space and you can achieve the retrorectus or reus stopa repair in the particular ventral hernia. But this repair is sufficient up to 5 centimeters or maximum 6 centimeters of the defect. But if the defect is of more size or is a larger size mesh, then you need to do a component separation or the TAR operation. So in that case, after doing the midline dissection or a retrorectus dissection, you have to do either unilateral TAR or you have to do a bilateral TAR. And then you can achieve this platform wherein you can put this much large mesh from one end to other end, from one side psoas muscle to other side psoas muscle. You can put a mesh. The mesh size will be approximately 30 by 30. Nowadays, 50 by 50 centimeter mesh is also available. You can put a one mesh or you can put two meshes like a reverse home plate manner, like this. So two meshes you can put and then you can cover the dissection area. So the preoperative CT scan is very useful. It allows us to locate the defect and measure it and establish the strategy of the surgery. Alfred Carbonell has given an algorithm, and what his algorithm says is a reus stopa technique is sufficient when some of the bilateral rectus muscle width is at least 2x or more than the maximum defect width. That means both sides rectus muscles, you have to measure the width of the rectus muscle. If you combine these two and see the defect size is below this sum of these particular two width of the rectus muscle, then you can go ahead and do only reus stopa repair. And if the additional myofascial release is required when the maximum defect width is closely approximates or exceeds 2x the rectus muscle width. What does it mean? Here you can see both sides rectus muscles are approximately 8 centimeter and 7.5 centimeter on either side. The defect size is a 4 centimeter. You can do only reus stopa repair here. But here, if you see the width of the rectus muscle on both the sides and the defect size is approximately same. So here, this patient may require TAR operation, or otherwise a condition like this, where both the width of the rectus muscle on both the sides is less than the defect size. So here definitely bilateral transverse abdominal release is required. So this is what is anatomy or applied anatomy of required for AWR. Thank you very much.
Excellently covered. Excellently covered, Rahul.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It was an excellent presentation. So the question answers would be taken at the end of all sessions. And there is a small announcement for the delegates that as this is an MMC accredited CME, a Google form link is posted in the chat box. So kindly fill up your credentials. Please do not put your registration numbers in the chat box. They won't be noted. So we'll move on to the next session for today, the PCST, the continuous beam of modern hernia surgery. It will be presented by Dr. Jignesh Gandhi. Sir is MSDNB, FIAGS, FALS, and FMAS. He is united in Department of Surgery, KEM Hospital, Mumbai. Sir is an awardee of P.N. Berry Fellowship from UK and also a trained robotic surgeon. He is a section editor in Journal of Minimal Access Surgery and specialty board member in National Board of Examination, New Delhi. Over to you, sir, for your presentation.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so I have no conflicts of interest in this topic today. It is purely for an educational purpose, and whatever views I'm going to present are my personal views and also a bit of evidence-based medicine. So when I talk about Kolhapur, it reminds me of CPR Hospital, where I've spent my good old days, and I go down to this institution where I have done my fundamental of learning surgery with great giants like Dr. Jadhav, Dr. Khoth, Dr. Patil, and many others. And it was a great moment learning with all those people. Kolhapur Surgical Society is a very vibrant society. Dr. Pratap Parute and his entire team, everyone, hats off to you guys. You guys have been doing excellent work. I can see Dr. Khoth. I still remember the way he used to do his anastomosis, and I was absolutely mesmerized with that in those days and even today. So when I talked about this topic, so it must come to your mind, why I'm talking about a continuous beam, why I'm talking about engineering as well as, surgery together. So if you see engineering purposes, there are different types of beams in which, so we all sit in a particular structure. And what AWR has is that it provides a continuous beam amongst all these beams. So we know about cantilever, we know about overhanging, but the PCST, what it does is it gives you a repair from one particular end of the hernia till the opposite end of the hernia, and it covers up the entire spectrum. So in my talk today, I will be giving you an overview of the PCST plane, which Dr. Rahul has very nicely told about. Quickly going through the indications, and then we will go through the procedure video. And I'll be telling you some tips of my Jugaad and particular tips of how we can do a good PCST, also known as a posterior component separation technique. And finally, not the least, Lakshat Asude. So I will be giving some points about that. आणि काही गोष्टी विसरू नका. So this will be also highlighted at the end of my talk so that you know what exactly you have to take home. So if you look at this slide prepared by one of my senior resident, Divashri, and she beautifully does all the illustrations for me. So when you enter into the hernia cavity, say for an open technique, the first thing you have to do is you have to enter into the Reeves Topaz plane, which exactly is something there behind the rectus muscle. And from there, we divide the posterior lamella of the internal oblique muscle, and without dividing that, it is not possible for you to enter into this particular plane, which is also known as the TAR plane or the posterior component separation. So posterior component separation technique will entail Reeves Topaz as well as TAR. So you make this fundamental very clear that when you're doing the TAR, you have to enter into the Reeves Topaz plane. Without that, you cannot do a TAR. And if you are seeing the muscle on the floor, that means you have accidentally from here got into a wrong line and you have landed up over here, and that's a wrong procedure in itself. And a lot of time people tell me and show me videos and pictures of TAR where there's a bare muscle seen on the floor. That means that you have gone into the wrong plane and you have to correct yourself. So quickly about John Reeves and Rennie Stopa. Two gentlemen, two different spaces. One came from the top down, the other came from below up. And that's how we know about the Reeves Topaz plane today. And hats off to these guys and also George Wants, who together gave this giant processes of the visceral sac. And today we remember these guys for this Reeves Topaz plane where we have explored it to infinity. So indications quickly for only Reeves Topaz repair would be midline repairs, epigastric, umbilical, and suprapubic. Even large inguinal hernias on both the sides you can do by Reeves Topaz, or recurrence if you are doing for an IPOM or an onlay repair. So can we predict, and Rahul has already mentioned, I'll quickly talk about it, from Reeves Topaz to TAR, is it possible? So say you've got a patient clinically and you've got a CT scan. This fantastic paper tells you about the carbonyl equation where you have to calculate the rectus width of one side and the other side, add up, and then divide it by the hernia maximum width. And then you can predict on these markers whether the patient will require an additional myofascial release or no. So by and large, in clinical practice that whether I'm going to call Rahul or I'm going to call anyone else for doing my TAR surgery just based on this, or you can do your Reeves Topaz or TAR by yourself. So coming to the concept of TAR, also known as the transversus abdominis release, learned from Professor Yuri Nowitzki in 2016 when I had been to his clinic in Cleveland, and we spent some time there learning about this project. So what actually the TAR muscle does is it creates a hoop tension in the abdomen, and basically it is used for acts of defecation, expiration, and micturition. And by doing this release, none of these are getting affected. So there are umpteen number of papers on that where there is a hypertrophy of the other muscles, and TAR has stood the step of time. So if you see this particular slide, tomorrow when you start seeing CT scan again, you'll be seeing all these particular muscles so nicely. We are all used to seeing the CT scan in the abdomen, but the moment you start seeing them closely, all these planes are visible. And look at this TA muscle. It is coming all the way up to the rectus muscle in the upper part. And this is a different anatomy from what we learned in our anatomical textbooks or during our anatomical training. So quickly, indications of TAR, by and large, anything which is 8-10 centimeters and above, you're going to do a transverse abdominis release. And today there is no hernia practically which you cannot do by a TAR technique. Once you know the principle very well, you can do it very, very comfortably. Contraindications, one should also know when not to do it. So relative contraindications are patients with previous attacks of pancreatitis, because we all know that in the TAR plane, you have to go all the way at the back. I'll show you some pictures. And retroperitoneal surgeries in the past also would be a relative contraindications. Now we are working on these patients in a new project where we are taking up patients of pancreatitis and a hernia following a necrosectomy, and then taking up them also for TAR. COPD is a relative contraindication, which also can be tackled. Preoperatively, it's a busy slide, but you should know that you have to prepare your patients well. These patients really need a good nutrition and good planning. Smoking is another aspect. One cigarette, for all those who are smoking, one cigarette reduces the oxygen perfusion by 38%. So that's a huge price to pay, before the surgery. So one should not get into that. In the steps of TAR, one has to do laparotomy with extensive and complete radiolysis as you enter the abdomen. Then you have to enter by making an incision and getting into the Reeves topaz plane, which I showed you. And subsequently, after making the Reeves topaz, you divide the posterior lamella, and then you get into the TAR plane. So this was the Decalogue, which we recently published. So anyone who is keen can go through all these steps. It is very well described in this particular thing, and I'm going to show you now. So the steps, what happens in the pictorial picture is, that's the hernia for you. This again is drawn by my president, Dr. Virendra. Thanks to him for giving these illustrations in this wonderful article. So the moment you are into the abdomen, first thing is save the peritoneum. Gone are these days where you pick up the peritoneum and just trash it. Don't do that. Please save the peritoneum. It is of a big rescue. The next step is entering into the Reeves topaz plane by making this incision 5 millimeter just lateral to the midline and getting into the Reeves topaz plane. Once you have done that, you get into the posterior lamella of the internal oblique. With experience, you can identify that very well. And once you have done that, do not go into this plane along the neurovascular bundles. Stay medial to the neurovascular bundles. Just see the TA muscle. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to put in this retractor. I have designed this particular retractor because I found it was very difficult to do that. So these are the TAR retractors, which are long and deep, and they get into this plane. What essentially you should also do is that once you put in this retractor, I additionally put in a sponge over the pre-transversalis pre-peritoneal plane. And a lot of time people ask me, how do you do and handle the buttonhole? So this is one jugaad which you should do. You should put in a sponge on top of that, because our fingers, sometimes with additional force in trying to get that, you can get into a wrong plane and you can make more buttonholes in the peritoneum. The second trick is that take away the TA muscle. So don't try to push the peritoneum or transversalis fascia down. Try to push the TA away from that area, and then you get into that very, very comfortably. This will prevent your buttonhole in the peritoneum. Once you have done that and you have secured closure of the posterior sheath and the hernia sac, you have utilized it. The next thing is this blue thing. You put in a large mesh of 30 by 30 in a home plate configuration. Home plate configuration comes from baseball. Anyone of you is following baseball, you'll understand what is a home plate. So these are two meshes. If you can see here, one mesh is put in ellipsoid form like this, and the second 30 by 30 is put like this. I have slowly started changing my practice, and now I'm putting a 50 by 50 mesh. So let us watch first this video, which is a cadaveric dissection from the Spanish group, and you will see how the steps are done in the TAR. So the first step is you divide and make and get into the posterior sheath. So we are seeing the right side of the patient, and the surgeon now is trying to enter into the Reeves topaz plane. So you can see this is a rectus muscle, and all this is a posterior sheath. So you keep on dissecting that until you reach the neurovascular bundles, which are somewhere around there, and that's your linea seminalis. The next step after you do this is to make an incision just medial to the linea seminalis, so that you cut the posterior lamella of the internal oblique, and then you straight away enter, and you can see the TAR muscle there. Many a times the patient may be having only a aponeurotic finding. Sometimes the patient may be having a good muscle. So you cut that, and you can see this on the floor. What you're seeing is a pre-transversalis peritoneum, and on the roof, you are seeing the TA muscle. So you have to see the muscle on the roof. The muscle should not be seen on the floor. And once you have done that, you keep on extending in the lower part as well as upper part. Care is taken on the upper part because that is the Achilles heel of this dissection. So you keep going in the upper part, you can reach almost up to the way of the diaphragm, and then you put in a large 30 by 30 mesh, put in a transfacial drains, and then you come out by doing these closures. So this is what we do in the open surgery. So you can see that this is what I've done, and I put in this large towel, also known as a TAR towel. The idea is that after you have done the adhesivolysis, put in this large towel there. So what it does is, it secures the entire bowel against anything. In a teaching institution, we used to paint this with methylene blue. In my practice, there are towels which are green colored, blue colored, easily available. So you need a towel right from the top up to the diaphragm till below up to the pelvic area. The next thing is that how you are going to divide the TA muscle. So option one is that you do a top-down approach. You come from the top and you divide the TA muscle. Option number two is a bottoms-up TAR where you divide it from below. What I would advocate each one of you who's going to start off is start from the middle, because this is where the bulk of the TA muscle is, and then the muscle is much better identified here. So this is when you can see that I'm into the Reeves Topaz plane here. These are the neurovascular bundles. And the first thing I'm going to do is make an incision just medial to the neurovascular bundles. So I enter into the cutting the posterior lamella of the internal oblique. The next thing is my upper TA, and you can see here how the harmonic works well. So this is the dissection of the TA in the upper part. Yes, it's not necessary that all the time you need harmonic, but it makes the plane better and cleaner. It is not an expensive way to do it. I always feel that a meticulous operation done in a good way with minimum dissection and blood bath will always benefit the patient. So you can see here how I'm dividing the upper fibers of the TA. This is a head end of the patient where you're dividing it. The next step is you do a cold dissection. So as you come closer in the midline, so this is where you do. I'm using in forceps with me, and then I'm lifting up gently layer by layer. I can tell you this step has to be done very, very slowly. Again, you're seeing the right side of the patient and where you do the dissection. Once you have done that, you can see here that I'm taking the TA muscle away. Look at that mop, the jugaad which I told you, and see how nicely the TA muscle is going away. And keep on putting your fingers more inside, the towel more inside, and then you will see that the TA completely goes up onto the roof. And then once you are gone enough on the posterior aspect, you will encounter some blood vessels which need to be taken care with nice bipolar dissection. And once you have done that, you get adequate space on both the sides. On either sides, you're supposed to go till the psoas muscle. The trick is that do not see the ureter. So stop before you see the ureter. That is what is a trick. Lower down, you're supposed to do the TEP dissection. In the upper part, you're going to see the central tendon of diaphragm. Not necessary in all the cases. It all depends on case to case. This is just a bird's eye view. So when you close the posterior ector sheath, and I've now described a zip sign. So if you see this particular thing, you will see few fleshy fibers of TA, which will be seen, which you have divided, and that looks like a zipper, which is unlocked. So I describe it as a zip sign, open zip sign, which you should see in all the patients. Then you put in this 30 by 30 mesh in the home plate configuration, 2 of them. But now I have changed my practice by using in a single mesh of 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. And then you can cover up the entire abdomen. What I'm stretching right now is to show you the anisotropy of the mesh. Every time you use a mesh, remember to stretch it in both the directions. The direction where it is more flexible should always come craniocaudal, because your linea alba, we bend forwards, the linea alba is more flexible, and your stiffer side should be transverse. And this is true, and I'm sure none of us have done it, and even I didn't do it unless I started understanding the science of anisotropy of the abdominal wall. So stretch it. The stretching side should come craniocaudal, and the stiff side should come from side to sides. Having done that, then you do the closure of the anterior rectus sheath very comfortably. And once you do that, then you look at something which is known as a plateau pressure. So here you can see that I'm closing the anterior rectus sheath. Here you do two ways. One is you come from below upwards, or you come from downwards. So you do it by figure of 8 interrupted sutures. I use 10 Ethilon. You can also use a 10 PDS, and then you can close this. Remember, when you're going to do this part, keep a watch on the plateau pressure of the patient. If your plateau pressure on the monitor of the anesthesia screen, the difference is more than 5, then you are into trouble. And once you have done that, you close the subcut in the skin. So these are the results. These are the patients whereby doing a TAR, you can see how comfortable they are, and this get the complete integrity of the midline by doing a TAR on both the sides. It is not a very difficult operation to understand, but having done few, you can gather what I'm trying to say. So in the key steps, I have already described what you're supposed to do. Important is do not excise the excess peritoneal sac. Use a Romson flat drain because that becomes very handy for the patients. And the rest of the steps I've already told you when we go through. There is something which is also known as a physiological closure. So a lot of times people ask me whether you need to fix the mesh or no. I do not fix the mesh because there is no way that mesh can move anywhere. It will remain intact in the same place. So I have learned certain things from the experts, how much superior you need to go up to the diaphragm, how much lateral, not to see the ureter, how much lower you need to go to the retropubic space. In the female patients, you have to divide the round ligament of the of the uterus very, very clearly because your mesh can come in very comfortably. How many cases you need to do to go from an open to lap TAR? I would say probably about 20 to 30. Which hernias to do first? Always start with midline, then go to lateral, and then graduate to go to subcostals. What meshes to keep ready? Vicryl, composite, heavyweight, and phasix mesh. Today, you can keep ready when you're doing these kind of cases. The Achilles heel or the troublesome part is the supraxiphoid dissection around the diaphragm, which is something which you have to actually see with a mentor doing it comfortably. And I feel that proctorship is very, very important and mandatory in the first 10 cases, absolutely must. So do not put the AWR technique into the patient. Select the right patient for the right technique. Just because I know something like a TAR or a EPAR or a SCOLA, I start doing it right, left, and center. You should not do that. That is not the way we do it. And the words of wisdom which came from Eric Polai, who is one of the AWR surgeons, is understand the anatomy well, understand the complications, reorient yourself if you're lost. Ask for a second set of eyes. Today with telemedicine, it is possible that someone can live see, and I have helped many people across India to do live surgeries with some kind of problems. And do not do a TAR unless you really need to do it. Just because you know something, you should not do that. And these are some of the work which we published recently. Some of the good articles, during the lockdown about the AWR, and I'll be very happy for you to go through that. This is an interesting thing on ICG because a lot of times you're worried about flap necrosis. We have used ICG to prevent the flap necrosis. So again, the morbidity of this PCST can be reduced by giving ICG in the patients and finding which flap is good and which is bad. This is the second last slide. A very nice thing wrote by John Reeves as Champs-Élysées, if you have been post-retirement. My dear Francisco was his attending surgeon at that time. I'm almost 68 years old and in good health. So this is the time when he retired, he wrote this. But I can still continue to work according to the WHO. But in the 5 years' time, I'll be a dead man as per WHO. Why not spend this 5 years doing some traveling, seeing an exhibition, or admiring a beautiful woman instead of locking myself into a conference room to exchange false pleasantries with my colleague? So great words by Jean Reeves at Champs-Élysées when he met his one of the coordinating surgeons. And finally, I do not claim that I am a Tarzan, but I have learned that, in the social media, people like to be called. And when I ask people, that whether you have done any TAR, they feel it as a social taboo. And when you ask the question, the only answer comes that "Kitni tari kelet." And when I discuss with them, you actually come to know that they have not done, quite some. So do not feel inferior if you do not know TAR. Even there was a day when I knew nothing about TAR. So we all slowly graduate from learning from our teachers and from our seniors. And I have no claims that I have done the good work, but I'm ready to help anyone who wants to. And as you get a smile, I'm sure all of you must have got a smile after looking at the dish in the right and left. The same smile you should get after doing a good PCST. That's what I always feel. And I'm sure the Kolhapur crowd would be very happy to see this. Some of them would be actually going to have this tonight. And finally, I feel that you should be a tailored hernia surgeon. And this is what I am. Everything does not fit, one size does not fit all. So get into a mode where you become a tailored surgeon, because then you know which patients are काय माप आहे आणि काय त्याच्यामध्ये करायला पाहिजे. And I bow down to all these patients of mine by giving me this huge experience on how I can go about teaching, and each one of them, have contributed to my learning curve and have, help me excel and train more and more people in my surgical practice. So these are the patients with which you can do all these things and do this. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you, Kolhapur Surgical Society and all my teachers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Very nice talk. Very good talk.
Good talk.
It was indeed a library talk.
Very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So let's we'll take the question answers at the end of the session. Again,
Sure.
for the delegates, there is an announcement that a Google link is posted in the chat box. Kindly fill up your credentials. So we are moving to the last session for today, which is presented by Dr. Shivram sir, and it is on journey of AWR patient from outpatient to OT. Dr. Shivram sir is head of the Department of Surgery and Allied Specialties and Program Director, Bariatric and Metabolic Surgery at Aster CMI Hospital, Bangalore. He is National Executive Committee member for ASI. He is Executive Board member of Obesity and Metabolic Surgery Society of India. He is also a PG teacher accredited by National Board of Examinations. And sir has written many books and chapters and publications in national and international journal. So over to you, sir, for your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Basavaraj. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Kolhapur Surgical Society, for inviting to deliver this talk. I think we had two wonderful talks. I hope I will do justice to this subject, that is journey of an AWR patient from OPD to operation theatre. I bring greetings from Aster CMI Hospital, Bengaluru. As you all know, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. For an AWR or a hernia surgeon, it begins at his OPD. When we see a hernia or AWR patient, what to do next? The first thing I would suggest is to ask this question: whether you or your center can manage this patient. Patient requires laparoscopic surgery or an open approach, which is suitable for this patient. Does patient need rehabilitation or optimization? Patient needs to be referred to the higher center or an experienced surgeon, or this patient is not fit for any surgery or any surgical procedure. Probably it is safer this patient to live with his problem or to have a complication or mortality post-operatively. I think these are the important decisions we have to make when we see a patient in the outpatient. That is because these days patients' expectations from surgeons are very high. They just want the hernia repair as a once in a lifetime experience. They don't want recurrence. They don't want any lifestyle alterations. They don't want surgical site occurrences, which I mean any infections, non-healing wound, or the fistula formation, mesh infection, or recurrence. They want everything to go smooth and no disfigurement of abdominal wall. Like earlier, people used to remove the umbilicus, disfigure the abdomen. So this is what patients expect from us. For this, a shared decision making is very important when we see a patient in the OPD. Gone are the days when doctor decides what is best. So now there are so many other things which come into play. The most important is the patient and the doctor sit together and take a shared decision process. That is an informed decision, which is the most important, explaining all the advantages and the disadvantages to the patients and also their relatives. So if you have a right patient, the right surgeon, and the right technique is done, then definitely there should be a successful repair and also no recurrence, no surgical site occurrences, no chronic pain, and ultimately we'll have a happy patient who will refer us more and more patient. As Dr. Jignesh told, especially in ventral hernia, the patient variability is huge, and one technique will not fit all these patients. The ventral hernia can be a very simple thing, or it can be a very complex procedure. So if you see, we have the suture repair, which is the simplest anatomical repair, up to the robotic hernia repair or the AWR. And there are n number of procedures which are coming up and new innovations are coming up for having a right technique for the right patient. this is very important to understand what is the suitable procedure for the particular patient. For that, we have to consider the patient parameters, whether it is defect size, tissue strength around the defect, abdominal wall weakness, whether it is a central or peripheral hernia, what's the BMI of the patient, whether it's a recurrent hernia problem, whether there is any contaminated field, intracutaneous fistulas, whether it is a parastomal hernia, whether there is loss of domain, or it's an elective, semi-elective, or an emergency surgery. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the EHS classification. And if we go according to all these things, definitely our journey along with the AWR patient will be very smooth. According to SAGES, there are contraindications for laparoscopic repair, and it is not suitable in many of these situations, especially the loss of domain patients. I see a lot of patients, the massive obese patients with large hernias undergoing laparoscopic surgery and coming back, and think probably it was not suitable from the beginning itself, especially when there is the infected field or incarcerated hernia or anti-active intracutaneous fistula, all these cases. So when we see a patient in the OPD, most important to remember is to take 3 steps to ascertain, to decide which is the right approach. And that is a good history, a good examination, and then a proper imaging of the patient.
जास्त झालं असतील तिकडेच ठेव.
Can you
तिथे
mute,
लपून ठेवूयात आपण. ते आपण दोघीच खाऊयात, छान झालेले लोक दातली तर आपली तोडली.
म्यूट कर महेश, म्यूट कर त्याला. शुभांगी जरे, kindly mute.
Thank you. A proper history should involve what causes any intra-abdominal pressure like chronic cough, asthma patient, the urinary difficulties, chronic constipation, and all these things. And also a good examination of the patient is very, very important. A cursory examination, thinking that, yes, this is just an umbilical hernia and I'll operate, and then definitely we will burn our finger. Many times what we see superficially, it may just be a molehill, and when you properly examine the patient, you will discover what is underneath. So if you just ask the patient to cough or leg raising or a head raising test, definitely you will unravel lot of things. This patient would have just undergone a umbilical hernia, but a proper examination reveals that there is a large divarication. There are 2 more hernias, and all these things require a proper planning and also a right approach. Otherwise, these patients will come back with the recurrence. Imaging has become very important in hernias. The just ultrasound may not be useful, especially in obese patients, massive hernias, complex hernias with subacute intestinal obstruction and recurrent cases. Even a plain CT, as Jignesh and Rahul demonstrated, will reveal a lot of things about the muscle, the plane, and what's happening to hernia. A plain CT is very important in all these complex hernias, whether it's inguinal or the ventral hernias. Once we have done taken the proper history, examined, and also properly imaged the patient, next is to optimize the patient before surgery. There is no need to hurry and also rush the patient to OT. We should optimize considering whether the patient is smoking, whether the patient's HbA1c is high, obesity is how much it is, and chronic cough, constipation. Sometimes patients may have to undergo a TURP before going for hernia repair, or the constipation causes may require some evaluation. If there are remote infection that has to be treated. Nutrition has to be taken care. We have to assess whether there is any liver disease or ascites. Sometimes these complex cases may require a multidisciplinary team meeting with the radiologist, with the ICU specialist, anesthetist, all these people, and then take a careful decision what is the best approach and what can be the post-operative course of these patients. Friends, surgery is like running a marathon, especially a major surgery. And all that we have to see is the patient is fit to fight. You all know that nobody runs marathon without preparation. So if we compare a major surgery for a marathon, why any patient undergo surgery without preparation? So they have to be prepared, they have to be optimized. Prehabilitation is rehabilitation of the patient prior to an operation. So the importance is to strength training, preventing any injury before the actual occurrence, that is the surgery. And also it is aimed at post-operative recovery. So important is given to nutrition, sarcopenia, all these things. Comparing prehabilitation to optimization, optimization is aimed at intraoperative events like the preoperative pneumoperitoneum or the Botox, all these things. The aim is to have the best or most effective use of a situation or a resource before taking these patients into the surgery. This concept is well established, especially in oncosurgery, cancer surgery, where the patient comes, he is already low on his battery or the energy, he is charged, then undergo surgery, and then if we continue his charged state or the nutrition and the good state, he will go back into the society in a good strength. So that's very important. So coming to the prehabilitation, we can train these patients in the inspiratory training using the simple respirometer and the preoperative strength training for some time. And if there is nutritional supplementation that has to be given, and the preoperative education, and also reduce their anxiety by frequently counseling and talking to them. Nutritional supplementation, some of these patients, we may have to take the help of the nutritionist. We have to assess their albumin, pre-albumin, hemoglobin, iron, and body composition analysis, or a single CT to image, which will help to assess the sarcopenia. And there are so many scoring systems for these things. It has been proved that if we start pre-operative, the oral nutritional solution, which contains high protein, and also correct their vitamin D prior to surgery, and also peri-hospital or peri-operative, you give them immunonutrition, even for a small number of days, and also carbohydrate loading, and continue post-operative, there is excellent results in all these patients. So these are all important when we do a major surgery, like a loss of domain patients in these categories. Pre-operative anemia can be simply corrected, not by blood transfusion, but by giving the iron therapy, vitamin B12, or sometimes erythropoietin to quickly improve these patients. So it's not correct to take a anemia patient to surgery and give transfusion or anything. Sarcopenia is very well established now. The combination of progressive loss of lean body mass with associated functional impairment, especially the sarcopenic obesity, it has a lot of implications for a patient who undergoes a major surgery. Lean, the muscles mass decreases, and this is replaced by the fat all over the body, whether it is visceral fat, hepatic, inter and intramuscular fat, and the subcutaneous. So these are not good for the patient. So we have to improve this patient nutritionally and also strength training exercises, and then take up these patients for surgery. Smoking, as Dr. Jignesh already mentioned, it has to be stopped. It has great implication for we surgeons. The diabetes has to be well controlled. Otherwise, the unnecessary preventable infections and problems can occur post-operatively. Obesity is one thing which we didn't give much importance earlier, but now we have understood that obesity is not at all a friend for the hernia or the AWR patient. The thin patient is a surgeon's delight. So also for the anesthetist, obesity can have very high risk factors for wound complications, DVT, chest complications, and also delay the post-operative recovery. So always check BMI, and if there is requirement, these patients have to be referred to dietitian, and exercise and weight management should be done. And sometimes they may require bariatric surgery first. A big patient, a big hernia is not a good combination, and these surgeries will definitely fail unless we correct obesity. So take the patient to the acceptable BMI and then do the hernia surgery. That will definitely stay. So like this patient who came in 2018, 126 kg, BMI 46, multiple comorbidities. First, we did the sleeve gastrectomy, waited for about a year, and the weight BMI came down to 34. Then she underwent a successful repair, and there is no recurrence till now. So let us not get into this vicious hernia cycle in an obese patient. So always, if the BMI is more than 35, manage the weight first and then the hernia, unless there is an emergency or obstruction or such things. So after rehabilitation, coming to the optimization. So sometimes it's the journey that teaches us a lot about our destination. So when we have started our journey in the AWR area, so we have learned many of these things. Most important is the loss of domain. There are many definitions and many indexes for loss of domain, but to simply explain, if the more than 25% of the viscera is outside the abdominal cavity, so that we consider as loss of domain, and it can be objectively assessed by CT scan and the index like Tanaka index. These patients, closure of the abdominal fascia is either impossible. Also, they can lead to abdominal compartment syndrome, cardiorespiratory embarrassment, and post-op wound dehiscence or bust abdomen. So these patients should be properly optimized before taking these patients into the operation table. Loss of domain definitely needs optimization. This is used to what happened to earlier. You take the patient to OT and finally you're not able to close it and then do tension sutures and then come out, and these will never stay. They come back with hernia. How to achieve tension-free repair and manage loss of domain? These patients, as explained, definitely ultimately require a mesh repair, probably a component separation to have a tension-free repair. So now we have most important two tools, that is the Botox injection or the chemical component separation, and also the preoperative progressive pneumoperitoneum. Other things are visceral reduction, the flaps, and also the increasing the space using tissue expanders. So these are the things which are done by the plastic surgeons. So we surgeons, we are happy doing the Botox or the preoperative pneumoperitoneum. Botox injection to the abdominal muscles is practiced by many of the AWR surgeons these days in loss of domain patients. This causes temporary flaccid paralysis of the external oblique, internal oblique, and the transverse abdominal muscles. And once you inject, it takes about 4 weeks to act, but once it acts, it lasts for about 6 to 9 months. The dose is 300 units mixed with 150 ml of normal saline, and it is injected to all the 3 muscles separately, 25 ml each under the ultrasound guidance. Wait for 4 to 6 weeks, do another CT scan, check that there is enough of intra-abdominal volume for the midline closure, and then operate. So this loss of domain in these patients can be overcome. So the other method is to do the pre-operative progressive pneumoperitoneum. So in this, what we do is distend the abdomen with air, either in the OPD or in a daycare setup, either using ultrasound guidance or the laparoscopy. We can put a pigtail catheter or a peritoneal catheter into the peritoneal cavity, and then daily inject air through these catheters, about using a 50 cc syringe up to 600 or 800 or 1000 ml daily till the patient feels little uncomfortable. If it's too much uncomfortable, don't force it. And this has to be done daily for about 10 to 14 days to have optimum results for the pneumatic dissection of bands and adhesions. And this facilitates the reinsertion of the bubble loops into the abdominal cavity, because the muscles, the relaxes, because expand, and also the diaphragm moves up. And finally, it allows for the midline closure with a mesh, probably a TAR repair. If you see here, this is the baseline CT scan where there is a lot of bubble outside, adhesions also. And when the Botox injection was given, some of it came back. The muscles here you can see they have lengthened, but that is not enough. So this patient also underwent the progressive preoperative pneumoperitoneum. All the bubble has come back and all the adhesions have released. This patient is now can be taken up for surgery, a mesh repair, probably with TA. So giant ventral hernias mesh repair, earlier they were straight away taken to OT and get into post-operative complications. But now with AWR, we can optimize them either with PPP, Botox, or sometimes both, and finally have good results without much of recurrence or post-operative complications. Sometimes we may have to keep our ego aside and do staged repair in some of these cases, and also hybrid technique. This is also another important technique which surgeons might have to consider pre-operatively. So with all this, you have prepared the patient and also taken all the factors into consideration, taken the patient to operation theater, and patient is fasting for 6 hours. We have done a carbohydrate loading 2 hours prior to surgery. I will just explain that. And this patient do not require any shaving preoperatively, hair trimming if it is required, bowel preparation not required, and Foley's catheter only in loss of domain massive hernia cases, and probably single dose pre-operative antibiotic half an hour before surgery or at the time of induction. Carbohydrate loading, we also practice this, and this is definitely a good thing to reduce perioperative hyperglycemia, improves insulin resistance. There are enough studies that it helps post-operatively and reduces the length of stay in the hospital. And this is the complex carbohydrate supplement we give at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the patient usually goes for surgery at 9 or 10 o'clock. And the ready preparation pre-carb comes, which is mixed with the 200 or 300 ml of water, and patient can take himself, and just costs just 200 rupees. Another worrying factor is about mesh infection. So many of them come for infected mesh removal. Louis Pasteur long back in 1890 or so said that, gentlemen, it is the microbes who will have the last word. So we are experiencing this in these corona days, and pre-surgery shower with chlorhexidine we practice this good to prevent the mesh infection or the surgical site infections. And as I said, hair clippers is good enough. The shaving practice can cause microabrasions. Bacteria can penetrate through the skin where there is microabrasion. They can colonize. They can cause surgical site infections. Prophylactic antibiotic definitely has to be given prior to skin incision and should not be given after that. Once we do the incision after the if the antibiotic is given after the incision is made, it may not prevent surgical site infection. So friends, in our body, there are more than 100 trillion symbiotic microbes, and they live with us happily, but sometimes they can become pathogens. And every surgery is an assault on our immune system. And that's the time we have to be careful that commensals should not become pathogens, and they create havoc with our surgery, especially the mesh infection. So very important that we practice sterilization of the instruments and not just disinfections. And probably most important nowadays is to have a proper the steroid or the autoclaving machines which can prevent of these patients, especially atypical mycobacterial infection, where this disinfection is not proper. And a prevention of surgical site infection is the practice of care bundles. And there are so many small issues which has to be tackled at different levels, and important to use non-porous and sometimes skin barriers if you are doing a large major surgery, prevents the skin contact. Patient warming systems is a must nowadays for a long duration surgery. Every surgeon should have a mesh infection prevention protocol to have good results. At least 10 rules we follow to prevent mesh infection. And we should learn from orthopedic surgeons who take every precaution so that their implant is not getting infected, including the space. They use space suit. They don't cut cost. Friends, mesh is an implant, and we are putting an implant to another human being who is maybe our colleague, friend, relative. So we have to take utmost precaution when we are doing an implant to another human being. And we all pray every day, and most important is that the invisible enemies, the microbes, not infect our patient. So what I am telling is, it is not enough to concentrate on the destination. Focus on the journey, not just the destination. The destination is the surgery and a happy patient. For that, we have to focus on what we do pre-operatively. Hernia repair is a community service. This is what Sir Cecil Bakely told in 1948. This is more important for the community so that we do a good hernia surgery and there is no mesh infection, there is no recurrence, and that is more of a service than operating on a malignant disease. Because each year, millions of people suffer from hernia all over the world, and they need some form of surgery, and they all come to surgeons. So let us take utmost care preparing these patients, and then taking the surgery for a successful AWR outcome in all these patients. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Experience talks.
Great. Yeah,
Excellent talks, sir.
true.
Very nice.
That was a great talk, sir. I request moderators to conduct the question answer session.
Shall I ask one question? Jignesh or Rahul? Am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The thing
Yes.
about the first thing I like you to talk on seromas. Second thing, because already he has talked about the mesh infection. So more you talk on seromas, that is better. Second thing, Jignesh talked about the wrong plane. That means instead of the recto transverse, you are above the transverse. So what are the complications you should tell the public? What are the complications? Because people have done that. They have gone in that plane above the transverse abdominis and put the mesh in that plane. So what it makes? So please.
So Rahul, you want to take the question on the seroma?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah. So seroma. Yeah. Yes. No. So the seroma.
so
Yeah. So
you-
seroma. No. I'll take the question.
Okay.
So coming to the first question of seroma, it is absolutely like the breast surgery. The more of the energy source you're going to use, you're going to create more melting of the fat and more seroma formations. I am a very strong proponent of using in a drain, and so are the centers from the west where they're doing high volume TARs. You keep the drain until your drain starts draining less than about 20 to 30 mils. That should be the time you should take out the drain, because keeping it longer may invite for infection. So the seroma formation is less likely if you adequately drain out the entire cavity where you have done it. The more and more use of energy devices like harmonic, what I've seen is that the chances of seroma formation are much lesser than you would get it. If you get a seroma in a case like this, then the protocol is very clear. Please do not do an OPD aspiration for this patient. Wait for 3 months and tell the patient it is most of the time self-limiting. It might just go away on its own. If it doesn't, then by 3 months, it forms a nice little cavity all around it. And it's like a cavity, so you have to entirely remove it. Only trying to aspirate it or draining it is not going to help, because it follows the principle that it forms a nice capsule around it. So you have to completely take it out. Sometimes you will see that the part of the mesh also is attached to along with it. In that case, you have to take out. So the cutoff is 3 months, but no needle aspiration, because you're going to invite for trouble. But if you have pockets of little collection here and there, by and large, over a period of time, they settle down. Initially, when I used to do the CT scan at 6 weeks interval, I used to see a lot of collections and stranding, and I used to get scared. But eventually, when I talked to Yuri, at about 3 months, they settle down completely. So that is a response to seroma. Second thing is, yes, people have gone into that plane between the TA and the IO, and that's the reason I put up that slide with the diagram. What happens in such cases is you will completely damage the neurovascular bundles, because very nicely, God has made the plane between external oblique and internal oblique no blood vessels. Internal oblique and transverse abdominis, neurovascular bundles. And below the transverse abdominis, again, nothing there. So when you are doing this kind of cases, you should have no bleeding at all in that plane, then you're in the right plane. So these patients land up with the neurogenic injuries. And typically what happens is that the whole thing opens up and splays up. And then you have a patient where the entire abdominal wall is become weak. The linea similaris becomes weak over a period of time, and then they develop lateral hernia. So these are the consequences which can happen if you can get into the wrong plane. But yes, there are corrective measures. The moment you're into the TAR plane, and if you see that why my muscle is coming on the floor and not the roof, stop, ask for a second set of eyes. Telemedicine today is so important, and you can just go there and do it. So that is an answer to the second question, sir.
Yeah, right. But I will tell you about the seromas. Seromas never come earlier. Late seromas are very common, and
Yes.
they are not with the drains, where they never respond to the drains. Drains are the worst thing in the life of a surgeon, because whenever they are needed, they are blocked. Whenever in this, because these are very fatty patients, and usually the fat itself blocks these drains. So you never get an advantage of a drain. And these seromas are usually later after one week or 2 weeks. Please.
So in fact, sir, it is a flat drain, which I'm talking about, the Romson flat drain, the Jackson Pratt. The conventional Romovac drain was very bad. It used to always get blocked.
I know. Yeah.
But I think the conventional Jackson Pratts are pretty good, and they work very well. And we are having some few questions in the chat box as well. With
Yeah,
your permission, Dr. Pratap, can we take them?
Yeah.
So I think there was one question. Yeah, so there was, yes, the moderators can take that. Saurabh, you want to take up those questions? Yeah.
Yes, sir. There's a question by Dr. Moses regarding the accidental buttonholes created while dissecting into the plane. So what
Yeah.
can we do to avoid it? And if at all it happens, what can we do about it?
Yeah, so nice question. How to prevent it? I already said that you put in one more layer by putting in a sponge, and you saw in my video that I put in a sponge, and so with your finger, when you're trying to push it down, it doesn't happen, and then you get away with that. That is one step. And if at all it occurs, very nice closure with 3-0 Vicryl is good enough. You will have to probably close it in bits and pieces. So once you have done your closure of the PRS in the center, you will see that. Sometimes you may not even get close to it. Lay open the omentum on that area very nicely and stitch the omentum all around that peritoneal hole which you have done with the 2-0 Vicryl or 3-0 Vicryl. It works very, very well. Still a big peritoneal hole, then you have options of Vicryl mesh, you have options of a composite mesh, you have option of a physics mesh. So all the three things are possible depending on case-to-case scenario.
So what is your method of dissection in this? Use a scissor or a low and cautery?
Yeah, so the initial cutting is with the 15 number blade. The moment you do that and you see a TA muscle, then you lift it up with a mixer forceps. And I use in a current of a bipolar at the setting of around 50 to 60. And if I'm using in a monopolar, then a blend mode at 30. So that is good enough because it will not cause the jumping of the current. There will be no twitching of the muscles and you will not buttonhole. And the idea is that if you're using in a cautery tip, you must have seen that quite often the cautery tip is like this. What I do is I make a slight bend on it. So when I'm using it, actually I'm parallel to the muscle and I don't go and make a buttonhole. So just bend the tip slightly. That is again a jugaad which I have learned is just bend it by about 45 degrees and then you will see you will be beautiful in that plane. Even the same trick can work even for your modified radical mastectomies. Just bend it 30 degrees, it goes in very nicely.
Great. That's quite helpful. There's a question by Dr. Deepak Patil, sir. He's asking about mesh. Is mesh fixation essential? And you did mention that you don't do it, but
yeah. So mesh fixation is not mandatory, but if at all you want to do a mesh fixation, what happens is you have an abdominal wall which is open like this, and you have a mesh below it which is going from the right side to left side. What you need to do is with the help of Ellis forceps, just stretch in your midline and mimic that you have closed the abdominal wall on one side. So try to bring this edge on this side. Now I will be putting in a suture passer from outside like we do for IPOM, and I take the prefix sutures on the mesh and bring it out. Because imagine that I have an open abdomen, I have fixed the mesh on both the sides. Now when I try to bring this, I'll be having a crumpling of the mesh. So that is known as closure of the mesh under physiological tension. So using a suture passer, but the way I'm going to use in a suture passer, where to pass, I will first pull that flap in the midline and then put in the suture passer so the mesh remains flat.
But one can take direct sutures with the mesh and the down.
Absolutely. Yeah. But the problem with that is, no. But the problem is, you can take that. What I'm trying to say is, I have fixed the mesh in this position. Yeah. Now I am closing the midline. What is going to happen is that this mesh on this side, there'll be a crumpling. So the tissue integration will be affected. So if at all you want to take it, sir, what you're saying is right. I will bring it to the midline where it is supposed to be and then fix the mesh. So it remains in that way.
Exactly. So midline.
So closure under physiological tension is the right word.
Yeah.
There's one more question by Dr. Deepak. So Deepak Patil, sir. So is it PPP or Botox which you have explained in the chat box? Patreon for the
yeah.
If you could explain.
Okay. So correct. So how do you want we select? First of all, we have established that there is a loss of domain. Yes, 25% of the contents are out. We know it's a loss of domain. The next thing to see on the CT scan is see the lateral part and where the oblique muscles are. If you find that the oblique muscles have become very taut, they've become very fibrotic, they have shortened. Whatever you do, the PPP is not going to work in this place. So this patients where the oblique muscles are very taut and fibrotic, with obviously with experience in seeing more CT scan, you will see a crumpled up oblique muscles on both the sides. PPP will not work adequately. You need to Botox these patients. And once you Botox them, it will induce a flaccid paralysis and it will work very well. PPP by and large is a kick-ass for everything because it's cost effective. You can use in a simple catheter inside and then you can put in that. Remember, when you do a PPP, the best time is at 10 days, but 14 days is the upper limit up to which you can put in the air inside and keep on insufflating. After 14 days, preoperative progressive pneumoperitoneum has no role. Second thing is about the Botox. As you see, the muscles are tight to give Botox. The peak action is at about 6 weeks, so you need to operate at that time. After that, the action starts falling. And in some patients where they are really huge, I have done a combination of Botox and PPP. So what to do first? First, you relax the muscles and then increase the cavity of the bag. It is like putting 2 kg sugar in a 1 kg bag. You have to expand the bag bigger. So Botox first, at around 4 to 6 weeks when there's a peak action, do a PPP, 2 weeks, and then you have a good time. Everything will open up and put the content inside.
This is my question. After a TAR release, is there any compromise on the ventilatory function or the respiratory function? Is there any, because TAR is considered as a corset, abdominal. So
Absolutely.
is there any difference in the respiratory? Has anyone looked at it? Whether there is a difference?
So we only have looked at it by doing the pulmonary function test. And as you know that TAR or TA is a muscle of expiration. So there is something which is known as FEV1, forced expiratory volume at 1 second, 2 seconds, and 3 seconds. And the total is the forced vital capacity. So we have studied all of these patients before and after, and then the TA, because it is a hoop tension along with the oblique muscles, we see no effect. So we have done pulmonary function before and even after 3 months, and the forced expiratory volume of these patients has not got compromised. The micturition has not got compromised, and they do extremely well because by and large, transverse abdominis, what it does is it stabilizes the lumbar spine. That is its main function. But yes, it also helps as a muscle of expiration.
Have you studied anytime the bowel evacuation?
Yes. So these patients who undergo this kind of major surgeries, they definitely have ileus. I can vouch and say that. So these patients, it is very, very important that you go very, very slow. Enhanced recovery protocol can be started, but what I have seen is sometimes we started patients too early. We had seen 1 or 2 patients having a breach of PRS because they start vomiting, nausea. So bowel activity is slow. Usually they take about 3 to 5 days for the bowel activity to come back, and that ileus settles on by that time.
Another thing,
I'm sorry, Rahul, yeah. Go ahead, please.
Another thing I want to tell you is while after doing a TAR, especially in open repair as well as in laparoscopic repair as well, when you close down the posterior rectus sheath or you're trying to close down the peritoneum, in that case, what you need to do is you need to apply the artery forceps on both the edges and just pull it in the midline and see the pressure changes. If the pressure changes are more than 5, then that patient needs post-operative ventilatory support. So that one should always keep in mind. And that is where you should see first, and then you should see whether you can release more or you are getting some more release so that there will be no tension on the posterior rectus sheath as well as the peritoneum closure. That is what
Rahul, we continuation with your explanation now. Many times we feel that even after bilateral TAR, we don't get, or the midline closure is under tension. So what to do in that case?
Yeah, so if you have a problems in the closure of the posterior rectus sheath, option number 1 is use your omentum or the peritoneum, which is available. I always keep on saying jokingly, try to save the peritoneum. Tigers will be saved by Government of India, but don't discard the peritoneum, number 1. Number 2 is
peritoneum, loose peritoneum or continuation peritoneum?
Continuation peritoneum. So try to keep the peritoneum on the posterior rectus sheath by and large, because that is where it's going to be helpful. That is not available. Second option is omentum.
Do you use a mesh, that biphasic mesh or physiological mesh?
Yes. So yeah. So option number 1, not coming close to each other, you have option of using an omentum. Option number 2, Vicryl mesh if you are available. Option number 3, composite mesh. Option number 4, Phasix, a biosynthetic mesh. That is the standard of care today. You are not using it. You are just using it so that you are giving that posterior layer. So PRS, you have options. Anterior rectus sheath, again, what Rahul mentioned, in anterior rectus sheath, what you should do is apply Ellis forceps on both the sides and wait for exactly about 5 to 10 minutes. At 10 minutes, look at the plateau pressure. Because what happens is we do the entire ARS closure, and at the end of it, the anesthetist says, sir, plateau pressure has become 10. Now, again, you have to open up the whole line. So don't try to do that. Mimic the closure by putting in 5 Ellis forceps on both the sides. The moment the pressure is more than 5, I will say close from top, close from bottom, keep on looking there. At the end, I will have a small gap remaining. I will use a heavyweight polypropylene mesh to bridge that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go till that level that the plateau pressure is okay. And then I'll using a polypropylene heavyweight mesh, and that does the job very well.
Though it is contraindicated, you have done bilateral TAR, posterior component, and now you're facing the problem with the anterior sheath. Can you still go ahead with unilateral anterior component?
So this has been debated in the international forum. You should not add an anterior component separation because
I know, but
So it's a good controversial question, but the rescue measure is using in a heavyweight polypropylene, and quite often I have used that as a bridging, and so the patients do very well. In fact, when you do a CT scan after 3 months, you can't even make out that there is a problem. That's the reason. The crux of the matter is save the peritoneum and keeping it on the posterior rectus sheath. And the trick to do it is, if you want to keep the peritoneum on the posterior rectus sheath, make a cut on the anterior rectus sheath, the peritoneum will go there. And if you want to keep the peritoneum on the anterior rectus sheath, make a cut on the posterior rectus sheath. This is a dictum which I tell people to remember, and it becomes very easy.
For the crowd, you just tell me, I'm sorry. For the crowd, you tell why at the same time posterior and anterior component separation should not be done.
Yeah, because if you see that anatomy picture which I told you, the hoop tension, all around is maintained by the TA muscle. Temporarily, you're going to release that hoop tension. So what is going to happen is now the lumbar spine stability is going to go away. Now you are also making a cut on the external oblique muscles. So all these muscles which are going to help you for the function of breathing, you have even disconnected that. So you have disconnected anteriorly, you have disconnected posteriorly. Both the muscles except for the internal oblique are lying in the air. The spine stability goes away. The breathing of the patient goes away. And mind you, sir, whenever we lift anything or we do any exercises, 40% of the strain is taken by the TA muscle. And that's why our spine is protected. That's the beauty of the TA muscle, that 40% it protects our spine. So if your TA is lost, then you are in trouble.
It is the rectus also.
Absolutely.
It is the rectus also which stabilizes, sympathizes to
yes. But the major, when you are jumping or doing any lifting activity, the stabilization of the spine comes from the TA.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Another point.
Yeah, Rahul.
I think there's a yes, Rahul, go ahead.
2 points I want to mention is as a take-home message. If you want to go ahead for the open TAR repair, then start from the virgin place first, and then you can see what structures you are dealing with. You can see the peritoneum, and as Jignesh has repeatedly told, that you have to save the peritoneum. So you can see the peritoneum layer and you can save that. If you start from the hernia itself, then it will be very difficult where you are cutting, what you are cutting, that becomes very difficult. That is point number 1. And point number 2 is, if you want to do a TAR at your place, mind you should always keep composite mesh, Vicryl mesh ready for all the cases of TAR. That is the take-home message, because that is most important, because these are the only rescue measures for this particular operation. Otherwise, you will be landed in a great soup.
We should not close under tension. At the end, patient should not have closed under tension. We have all the methods to relax and close the.
Otherwise, patient is also under tension and surgeon is also under tension.
If they go to ICU.
Yeah, Basavaraj.
I think,
Time.
Lot of time, I guess. A wonderful talk by all the 3 speakers. I would thank Dr. Rahul Madha, Jignesh sir, and Shivam sir for the same. Over to Dr. Basavaraj.
Thank you, moderators. Thank you, Deshpande sir. Thank you, Saurabh. And with this, we come to the end of today's AWR session. I again thank.
President sir wants to add anything?
Yes, sir. Tarvi sir.
कुठं जेवायला लागले ते
जेवायला गेले?
जेवायला
I'm very much there. I have already congratulated all the three speakers on personal WhatsApp for an excellent talk. I have given them my peace of mind as a senior surgeon, and kudos to everybody. Wonderful session, no problems at all. But there are things which listeners have to realize, that these are the procedures which cannot be taken up single-handedly unless there is a guide to do all these sort of surgeries. Fortunately, I have all of them, guiding me whenever I am supposed to be doing these sort of surgeries. So wonderful session, Kolhapur Surgical Society. Suresh, thank you for joining. Suresh is my senior always, and still he could not get into the volume mode. So I can take this opportunity to thank him for joining and asking excellent questions. Madhur, I have already told you what to do. Vignesh, I've already asked my questions to you. Shivram, you're an EC member. I will not ask the question, but it was a difficult presentation after these two, but you have done justice to the job, and congratulations to you too, because it's a different question when you got to follow hernia only when you are specializing in bariatric surgery. Thank you so much for being there. And I'm not a president of ASI when I actually attend. I am Kolhapur Surgical Society primary member, where these people just get me into the conferences. And when I know that Suresh Deshpande, who has been my senior and guide, wants me to attend, I have to attend. Thank you so much.
वरोटे सर, अजून पार्टी राहिले सरांची. आता झालं ना सर?
कसली पार्टी आता?
वेबिनार संपला तर. अरे ASI प्रेसिडेंट झाले तर कोल्हापूरला आले नाही ते.
रेकॉर्डिंग चालू आहे.
असू दे, त्याचं संपली वेबिनार संपली. एवढे सगळे यायला पाहिजे त्याला पार्टीला वेबिनारचे.
रेकॉर्डिंग बंद झाल्यानंतर करू शकतो आपण.
ओके, ऑल द बेस्ट.
शिवराम सरांना पण इन्व्हाइट करा.
डेफिनेटली.
सरांनी सगळं दाखवलं. स्वतःचा वेट दाखवला, लाल आणि पांढरा सगळं दाखवलं.
चलो, थँक्यू व्हेरी मच.
थँक्यू.
Good night, sir. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Jignesh. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay Kasa. Thanks, Vijay Kasa and Pasavraj for.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I also thank today's observer, Dr. Deshmukh sir, delegates, and today's sponsor, Torrent Pharma, for sponsoring this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.